Hello everyone. Welcome firstly to Amy's Bookshelf. Now, if you watched any of my videos that I posted earlier this year, then I apologise for leaving a 6-month gap between posting, but the thing is, editing videos takes so long. And that's just got a lot going on in my life, so it was really hard to find the time to do it. And I did say when I started this channel that I couldn't promise to ever post consistently or regularly, so you know, you knew what you were in for. But anyway, I'm here. I am posting hopefully a couple of videos for the end of 2022 / beginning of 2023, so yeah, enjoy these. Today's video will be my top 3 reads of 2022. I actually have 5 because there are 2 honorary mentions. I'm not going to go into like incredible detail for any of them, but I'm just going to tell you a little bit about them, why I love them and why I think you should read them too. So first things first, I want to do my honorary mentions, which is these 2. There's actually 3, and maybe I'll start with the third, but I don't have a copy of it because I borrowed it from my friend. But the first one is Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany D. Jackson. This was an incredible thriller, one of the best thrillers I read this year. It had an amazing plot, it was so layered, the characters were great, also the sun is coming out and now blinding me. But yeah, really original, kept me on the edge of my seat. I didn't want to put it down. The ending was shocking. Honestly, there were so many great things about it, so yeah, really recommend that. And ever since then I've been trying to read more Tiffany D. Jackson books, but for whatever reason they're really hard to get hold of. Like whenever I go in a bookshop, just can't find any copies, so maybe that should be one of my 2023 goals, to buy and read more Tiffany D. Jackson books. But yeah, first honorary mention, and then my second 2, Released by Patrick Ness. This was actually given to me by my friend Jazz from Travels and Fiction. She was unhauling some books and she gave me this. I am so annoyed it took me so long to read it because I loved it. Now, it's only an honorary mention, not in my top 3, because, and anybody who's read this book will know exactly what I'm about to say, there's like 2 narratives within this book. There's basically a coming of age story of a kid called Adam. And then there's a second storyline which is about a ghost rising from a lake nearby. You know, do with that information what you will. That is the reason, that ghost narrative, which I just couldn't get on board with, is the reason this is not in one of my top 3. But apart from that, I loved Adam's story. It was emotional, it was compelling, it was just a hug in a book, and I loved everything about it. So I would still recommend this book even apart from that other narrative. And then the second, or third rather, honorary mention is The Housekeeper and the Professor by... oh, it doesn't have their first name on it. Yoko Ogawa. This is translated from Japanese. It's quite short, and it's basically about a maths professor whose memory resets, I think it's every 80 minutes. Yeah, 80 minutes. And he struggles to obviously form relationships with people because he can't remember who anybody is. And a woman comes to work with him as his housekeeper, and she brings her son along occasionally while he's not at school. And it's about the relationship that forms between them. It was amazing. I loved it. It was, again, emotional, compelling. I love the characters, I love the storyline, I love what the book was trying to achieve. So yeah, I would really recommend this, and this so nearly made it into my top 3 but just missed. So now on to my top 3. Now, interestingly enough, apart from this one, these 2 I actually only read in the last 4 weeks of the year. This I read at the beginning of December, this I read at the end of November. So that just goes to show that you don't know what your year will look like until right at the very end. But I'll start with the first one, the other one, because I read that earlier in the year. I believe I read that back in, maybe October? Sometime anyway, and I got a copy of this from New York. Basically, I read Everything Leads to You a couple of years ago and adored it, so ever since then I have been on the lookout for other Nina LaCour books, and again, similar to Tiffany D. Jackson, for whatever reason they just don't seem to be in bookshops in the UK. But anyway, when I was in New York, I was browsing bookshops there and I managed to find a copy of We Are Okay by Nina LaCour. So this is just a gorgeous edition of this book. It's got this like matte front, really floppy pages. It's a great book. But anyway, yeah, so I wanted to read that this year because I know how much I loved Everything Leads to You, so I really wanted to get into another one. So this one, it's probably not YA, it's like new adult, and it concerns the protagonist Marin, who basically has run away from home. She has a lot going on with her life. I won't go into too much detail because it kind of spoils it, but she went through quite a lot of trauma, has quite a lot of grief, and she ended up running away from home and moving to college, and basically cutting off all connections with her old life. So we meet her when she's staying at her dorm over Christmas. The book moves around in time a little bit because we have the present where she's in her dorm, and then we also have the past where we learn a bit more about what happened, why she ran away from home, and her relationship with her grandfather mostly. The present also concerns her friend. What is her name? Mabel. Mabel comes to visit her in her dorm to basically ask what happened, why she ran away, and we learn a bit more about their relationship too, and about the fact that Marin sort of ran away from that but perhaps has a lot of feelings that haven't gone away, and their relationship in particular is really beautiful, and I loved the way they interacted with each other. So sorry if that premise was a bit all over the place, but anyway, the reason I love this book so much is just how quietly impactful it was. There was no like kind of big moments, there were no sort of loud and aggressively impactful moments, but it just kind of crept up on you, and by the end you just felt this overwhelming weight of emotion because of everything that Marin went through, of everything the book was trying to achieve, everything it was saying about human connection, about grief, about our relationships with each other, and I just adored it. And by the end I was holding back the tears, which is really hard for me because I normally don't cry at books. Famously, I've only ever cried at 3 books. Another one is coming later. The other 2 are The Fault in Our Stars and A Little Life. So yeah, I don't cry at books, and this almost got me there. But the ending was beautiful. Everything about it was gorgeous. I just loved it. So yeah, would really recommend it, especially if you enjoy reading depictions of grief, or actually any sort of emotion. There's a lot of a lot of emotions to unpack in this, and this edition also has a introduction from Nicola Yoon, who is also one of my favourite writers. I adore her books, again for the fact they are so deeply emotional and have so much depth and layer to them, and that's exactly what this did too. So yeah, first top read of the year, would really recommend that. Next up, this was what I read in November, was Betty by Tiffany McDaniel. Now I'd heard that this was really emotional. Again, this didn't make me cry, but it was very emotional, and I'd heard it was a little bit traumatic, so I was a little bit worried going in. I didn't know how hard it was going to be to read. So yeah, went in a little bit hesitant. Anyway, the book concerns Betty, our protagonist. Betty was born to a white mother and a Cherokee father, and this is set, I think it starts in the 1950s, yeah, 1954, in America, in the Appalachians, or Appalachia, I should say, not literally in the mountains, but that area of America, and it basically goes through her life. It's a coming of age story. I'm not quite sure how old she is by the end, but I would say it probably spans at least 20 years ish. And yeah, like I said, coming of age story about Betty and her family. So she has quite a few siblings, some of whom are dead and some of whom are living, and then also her mother and father, and it is just about their life. And it's one of those books that when you first start reading it, you think, yeah, this is fine, I'm reading it, you know, just taking it for what it is, and by the end you realise how in love you are with all of it. Now, I agree with what a lot of people said. There are quite a few traumatic bits. There's a lot of trigger warnings for things like sexual assault, violence, racism. So if any of those trigger you, please look them up rather. But I do think it was a beautifully written story, and Tiffany McDaniel did such an incredible job of conveying all of the emotions and the events and everything that happened to Betty and her family. And I just loved their relationship with each other, especially Betty's relationship with her father, and actually the father character in general was gorgeous. One of my favourite characters ever, probably, just, or one of my favourite depictions of a character ever. Now, I'm not 100% sure of the background of this book, but I do think it's partially autobiographical. Although I don't think it's a like play-by-play exactly of Tiffany McDaniel's life, but I know she pulls a lot of it from her real life, but I'm not sure to the level of which that goes. So I think she's pretty private, and she hasn't ever like said explicitly how much it is actually a reflection of her own life. But yeah, like I said, it's definitely semi-autobiographical, which makes everything a lot harder to read. But like I said, really well written, such a compelling story, and it's definitely a slow burn. So if you do start reading it and think, Amy, why do I care, just stick with it, because it's one of those slow burns. It will, and by the end it will have captured your heart, I promise. So yeah, really loved Betty. And my final pick, and by the way, these aren't in like a 1, 2, 3 order. I mean, it was hard for me to pick 3, that's why I did 6. And these aren't like 1, 2, 3, they're just the top 3, so I'm not really ranking them against each other. But yeah, this is the last one, and this one did make me sob quite uncontrollably, and that is Fredrik Backman's The Winners. Now, if you follow me on social media or you've seen any of my videos, you know I love Fredrik Backman anyway. This is actually the 3rd one in the Beartown series. So it goes Beartown, Us Against You, and then The Winners, and this was only published in English in, I think, October this year, so very recently. Hence why I have it in hardback. I hate hardbacks, but it's the only choice when things first get published. So yeah, since I've read Beartown, I've also read A Man Called Ove, which I adore, as does everyone. I've read Anxious People. I've read recently, on Christmas Eve, just gone, myself and Jazz, Travels in Fiction, Buddy read The Deal of a Lifetime, which is a Christmas short story from Fredrik Backman. Basically, I will read absolutely anything of his. He's one of those authors where, you know, I would find his shopping list interesting. I just adore the way he writes, and the fact it's translated as well is just, I just find it so fascinating that somebody can write so well in one language, and then when it's translated it can still hold so much beauty. I would love to read it in Swedish because it's probably even better. It goes without saying that I knew I was going to love this book, because I actually loved Us Against You even more than Beartown, so I was really happy to finally have a copy of this. Now, if you don't know anything about Beartown, it's a hard book to talk about without having too much spoilers, but it basically concerns a town in Sweden called Beartown. There's a lot of hockey in the book. A lot of the plot revolves around a hockey rivalry between Beartown and a neighbouring town called Hed, and basically how every resident in both of those towns, how their lives revolve around hockey. So it concerns some of the kids who are the stars of the hockey team, their parents, a lot of people in the community, and it's one of those books that doesn't really have a protagonist. It's very much an ensemble cast, and all of these people, some from Beartown, some from Hed, and with The Winners we get to see a lot more of Hed, which I really enjoyed, because I think it's one of those books where in Beartown you fiercely support everyone in Beartown, and slowly by the 3rd book especially you realise that actually the people in Hed aren't the enemies, and when you hear their side of the story, everyone's just the same, you know, everyone's human, everyone's trying to get by, and there's no real enemy, so to say. So anyway, Beartown, yeah, I won't go into details of the plot, but it's basically about Beartown itself and the residents who live there, and there is an event that happens that causes quite a big stir, and that book is basically the events that happen after that. Us Against You is then carrying on that story with the same characters, with a few new characters in there as well. It's the aftermath of what happened, and again the continuing rivalry between Beartown and Hed. And then The Winners again carries on that even further, again with the same characters but also some new ones, again with the hockey rivalry, and again with everything we're very used to. So yeah. And this one was definitely by far the most emotional. I think once you've read 3 books with the same characters, it's very hard not to be attached to them. And by reading the first paragraph of this book, you will know why it's such an emotional roller coaster. But I just loved it. I adore Fredrik Backman's writing so much. And like I said, I knew I was going to love this. He has such a way of musing about the world, about our relationships with each other, about human connection, and you can probably see a pattern here. That is just what I love in books. I love things that just take the mundane and make them beautiful by simply talking about them, and analysing them, I suppose, and just talking about how we're all just human and trying our best. And yeah, that's why I love him so much, and that's why I love this so much. So if you have read Beartown and you're not sure whether to carry on with the series, I promise you it's so good. And if you haven't read any of the series yet, I would really recommend it, and I would really recommend any Fredrik Backman book. If you haven't dabbled into any of his backlist yet, they're all great, so start anywhere. They're all good. But yeah, this in particular was phenomenal. So yeah, that is the end of my little 3/6 top books of the year. I read, well, we are on the 29th of December, so I'll probably squeeze in a couple more, but so far I've read 119 books. So yeah, it was really hard to pick a top 3, and there are plenty of other books I could talk about that were great, and perhaps I'll do another video, but those were my top reads of this year. So yeah, hope you've enjoyed this. Let me know what your top reads are, or if you've read any of my top reads and what you think of them. And yeah, I hope you've all had a wonderful year, and I hope you're excited for all the books that you're going to read in 2023. I know I am, as always. Yeah, and I hope next year I can be a little bit better at posting more consistently on my channel, but who knows, I'm not making any promises. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Bye.